Hi everyone, welcome to a new episode of In Other Words with Danielle and Zara.
This is a podcast where we talk about a wide variety of different subjects, from friendship to addiction. So in other words, we talk about all the things.
Okay, so we are yet again very, very excited for this episode. We have a guest whom you've heard before, and she was just so awesome the first time, we had to have her on again. So Christel, is there anything else you'd like to share? Maybe just a quick recap for those who maybe didn't listen to the previous episode of who you are.
Okay, so I'm Christel, and I was born in Maritzburg, Pietermaritzburg, and that's in KwaZulu-Natal. And I spoke the last time on the issues of human trafficking, how one can identify human trafficking, and all the things around that. Mm-hmm. All the things around human trafficking, and also what we can do as individuals to just help the situation and be more aware of it.
Cool. So do you want to tell the people what we're talking about today, Danielle?
Yes. So if you haven't listened to the episode with Christel, then you definitely should go check that out right now, and then you can come back to this one. But today we're going to talk a little bit about emotional abuse in relationships specifically, and Christel is going to share her experience with us, which is really awesome. So
you can just kind of start off maybe just before you met your ex-husband, and then go from there and share your story, and we'll interrupt you if we have questions.
Okay, excellent. I was brought up in a good Christian home, and my mom and dad were very strict religious church-going people, and so obviously the things that they taught me were very much in line with the traditional way of thinking, and also the quite a legalistic way of thinking. Mm-hmm. And so as I grew up, I had quite a few questions, because I did have a strong relationship with God, but some of the things just didn't make sense. Mm-hmm. It sometimes seemed like what they were telling me to do, I didn't see that matched with the Bible completely. Mm-hmm. And then also I'd read the Bible and have questions for God, but I felt like with my relationship with God, I could talk to him about it. And when I tried to ask those questions in church, it was like, no, you don't ask that. All you have to do is just believe. And so I went on my own journey of trying to discover God. But my upbringing with my mum was she was very much a right or wrong person. There was never a grey. And so when she discovered her relationship with God, she wanted to teach me the right things, obviously. And so when I was a teenager, I was about 10 or 11 years old when she started trying to instruct me or teach me about the birds and the bees, and what the right thing to do is, how to do things in relationship correctly. And one of the things that really stood out was that I shouldn't kiss a guy before I get married. Mm-hmm. I shouldn't get physical with a guy before I got married. And so everything that I experienced from my friendships at school, where they were going out on dates, they were kissing boys, they were having fun with discussing their relationships or friendships with boys, I started thinking I'm a real misfit. And I also started doubting, like, what is this actually all true? But my desire to be right before God and to please God and to please my parents, especially my mum, were so high that I started also believing that I was perhaps wrong and that I was bad, because I had these desires that I wanted a relationship with a boy. I wanted to also experience what the other girls experienced about, like, kissing a boy and the excitement of, kissing a boy. And I just started thinking, well, maybe what my mom is saying is for my protection. But I also thought that, she's trying to take away my fun. But I decided I was going to walk the straight and narrow. But in doing that, I the self-hatred for having these hormones and having these feelings grew and grew. And so that's where I think the self-loathing came in, and hating the fact that I was female, because now I had boobs, and boobs were looked at by men. And I had a desire to go out with a boy, but my mom had said, don't kiss a guy before you're married. So I thought to myself, what if I go out on a date with a boy, he's going to kiss me, and then I might just like it so much I won't want to stop, and then I have done wrong, and then I will be wrong. And so I made a decision. I wasn't going to go out anywhere with boys, and I wasn't going to even hold a boy's hand, because then that would not lead anywhere near sex, and that would be the end of the story. So marriage was almost, to me, the most important thing, because when you got married, everything else was fine.
That is
so
like the
marriage
narrative. It's like the end all and be all, and like
Exactly.
we strive for marriage, and
Yes.
it's supposed to fix everything in our life.
Yeah.
And if I'm married, then I'll be a true lady. I'll be a true woman who can express all her emotions that I had building up inside of me, that is normal. Now I realize, we all have hormones. God gave them to us. But I started hating myself for having these hormones and not knowing what to do with them.
That's very scary, and I think it's almost just in very conservative circles, women are almost kind of just seen as a body and all of these things, and so we're taught, no, that's bad, so we need to hide these things, we need to be ashamed of ourselves. But I almost think, and you can explain your experience as we get further into your story, of just how do you shift that mindset all of a sudden when you get married, from like, I'm terrible, to like, oh no, now it's fine, these things are fine.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And it's a lot of pressure to try and be perfect.
It is, and to be like you've got to be a lady during the day, but then at night you've got to be the sex goddess. And so it's the pressure is huge, because one just thinks, so as a female already, you have this expectation from a young age, especially in the Christian circles, because suddenly when you get married, then you can be everything that is supposed to be in a woman.
Yeah.
And so that mindset, it only shifted once I'd been through a bad experience, unfortunately. So to save many listeners from the bad experience, it would be lovely if I could have had this knowledge or this mindset, when I was younger or growing up. It would have actually been very valuable to me. So one of the pointers is that boys aren't bad, and men aren't bad, and hormones aren't bad.
Yeah.
And females, us as women, we are so treasured by God, and we have such a vital role to play in men's lives. And we are beautiful. We are supposed to take care of ourselves and dress beautifully, because that's one of the gifts that God has given us, to be able to express ourselves in that way. But with that comes a sense of self-respect. If you know that you are truly loved by God and valued, and that you were born to be a helpmeet for a man, you were born to express yourself and be there for your own purpose and destiny that God has created you for.
Your identity isn't in your husband.
That's it.
Who is the better.
Yes.
Yeah.
We weren't supposed to be there as and only be complete when we've met a man. And
Amen.
and I think that's somehow where my mindset shifted to, because everything was based on, when you get married, then you can do this and this, or everybody wants to get married, everybody wants to get into a relationship, and relationship for me meant marriage, because I wasn't just going to go and have one night stands.
Dating wasn't an option.
Dating wasn't an option. Yeah. So suddenly God was supposed to miraculously drop this man from heaven, and that's. And when I think about it now, I mean, it's ridiculous to think that I almost believed that, but the boys at school would say, Christel, where's this Greek god? Is God just going to drop him from heaven? And I'd be like, no, he'll be there at the right time. And I was so serious about it. And they, the reality of it was that I was afraid of being friends with boys in case I liked them. I was afraid of associating with boys in case they liked me. I was ashamed of my bits, if I can call them that. All my female goodies that are created by God. They're beautiful. There's nothing wrong with them, and they are part of what makes us women. For the parts, the roles of mothering and the nurturing and the caring and just being there as a beautiful vessel that God can flow His love through. So my idea of men had to change, and this is part of the mind shift that is so important for us to know as women, is that men are there as our protectors, as in many roles. They aren't supposed to be there to run us down. They're not supposed to be there to dominate us. They're not supposed to be there to play a role in our lives that would control us, our personalities. They are supposed to, in a relationship form, they are supposed to stand alongside us and encourage us to be better women. And we are supposed to be in a relationship with them when the time comes to also be able to empower them to be the best person that they can be. And so, in other words, the sexes is actually no different, other than we perhaps play different roles in our relationships and marriages. But value, we are equally valuable in God's eyes, and we are equally as important. And God does not see one as more important or vital or necessary than the other.
Yeah.
Okay, so do you want to speak about when you met your ex-husband and how that all happened? And
Yes. So with this belief that I've just explained to you, these couple of beliefs, I believed that I was less than a man. And so I was at the gym, and I attracted a man that also believed a similar thing, that a woman is less important than. So he was a gym fanatic, a bodybuilder, powerlifter. To me, that was like, oh, this is a man. He knows who he is. He's confident. And that to me was like, well, he definitely knows what he wants in life, and maybe he'll be able to lead me and guide me. And so I was quite fascinated by the fact that he asked me out on a date. So I'd never been on a date before, and so I thought, okay, I'm going to go out on a date with him, because by now my family had started thinking that perhaps there was something wrong with me, that I either had no attraction or that I was only attracted to girls. And so they were kind of like, what are you exactly?
like pushing you to, you need to find someone now.
Yes.
How old were you at the time?
I was 19.
Yeah.
So the first guy that asked me out on a date, I said, yeah, I'll now go with him, because I've wanted to go out on a date with a guy. But I've just wanted to walk along the straight and narrow. And I'd been overseas after earning a bit of money, and I just thought, well, now I'm going to. The man is still not in my life, and so maybe I should be going on this date. So I did, and then he kissed me. And I then thought, okay, now the man's kissed me, and Mom said never kiss a man before you're married, and so now I've done that. So now this is bad, because now I can't kiss another man, because then I feel kind of committed to this man.
Sure.
And so that's where the thought processes started going. And because I'd never dated any other guy before, and I'd been too scared to befriend any guys, for those reasons that I'd mentioned earlier, I then thought, well, whatever happens, this man, I've got to try and make this work. Sure. So any treatment that he gave me, whatever he said to me, I just thought that this could be normal. I don't know. Mm-hmm. And maybe it's me that's causing him to say these things. Maybe it's me that's causing him to be irritated and frustrated. So I blamed everything on myself once again, because I was already feeling like something's wrong with me. Mm-hmm. And I was already feeling shameful. And so I took the blame on myself. And the relationship became more and more emotionally and verbally abusive. First of all, it was just making jokes and fun of me in front of friends and people by saying things like, oh, Christel knows which side her bread is buttered on. Even though he would always criticize me, he would flirt with other girls. And you know, I was attractive in my youth, and I had a perfect body, because I tried to make my body perfect so that I would be acceptable. And I kept thinking, well, maybe there seriously is something wrong with me, because it can't be my appearance that's wrong. So maybe it is something within me that's flawed, and that's what's causing him to think that, to make jokes of me like this. Then the emotional games would be played, where he'd tell me that I didn't, what I was thinking he said was not actually what he said. Mm-hmm. And where I said he was supposed to be going, he said, no, that's not what he said. It's actually, and he'd twist things. So mm-hmm. the lies, I started thinking, well, maybe I am losing it. So this, with every bit of these emotional games and the harsh words that he'd speak, where he'd just make me feel like I was stupid, and sometimes actually even call me stupid and tell me that I know nothing, it started making me doubt my own intelligence. Yeah. And I thought that I honestly can't be worth anything to any other man either, because if he believes this, then maybe all the other men believe this too, and maybe that's why I never went on a date. Maybe that's why nobody would have ever asked me on a date, so it's just as well I never tried. All of these type mm-hmm. of things that came up.
Yeah. And what was the progression? Because how long were you married for?
13 years.
13 years. Mm. So did it get progressively worse? So how soon into the marriage did you realize things were not?
Pretty soon. It was about within the first 6 months. Wow. I knew, even of our relationship, I knew that things weren't right. But obviously it progressed where my self-worth was very low. And the way that he then proposed to me was he in front of the public at the airport, because
how can you say no?
Yeah, I'd actually gone to my sister in Cape Town and stayed with her for a bit, because I'd found out that once again he'd been unfaithful and in our relationship. And so I went to my sister, but even from there, the manipulation on the phone. He made me believe that he really loved me, and he was staying at home every night. But meanwhile, we didn't have cell phones in those days, and so we had pagers, and you'd have to phone a number, and it would page the person, and there was never any response. I'd phone his home number, and he was still living with his parents. So they said, no, he's not here. So I knew that there were lies being told, but still I couldn't resist the fact that this man might be the only man that would ever love me.
Sure.
And so he flew over to Cape Town and said, I'll prove to you how much I love you. I'm going to come visit you in Cape Town. So he flew over. At the airport, he proposed to me with roses in his hands. And so all the people that were on the plane, obviously with him walking on with roses, knew this a special occasion, and they'd asked him. And so I said yes. And then from there, in the marriage, now that he actually had me, and the the emotional and verbal abuse became far worse, because now it was like I was his property, and now he could treat me anyhow because we were married, and he knew that I would never get divorced. That was what he knew what my values were. He knew exactly what I believed and how dedicated I was to him throughout our dating periods too. And so he just, whatever he felt at the time, whatever anger he felt, he would let it out on me. And that then he'd come with his apologies. And with those apologies would come, like, I'll promise you, I need help. I really need your help. And so I felt, with my compassion and my unselfishness, I thought of him again, and I thought, shame, it's my duty as his wife to help him and to be there for him and to support him. And so this whole cycle just kept repeating itself. And with each cycle, I just started going further and further down into my sort of self-loathing, because I knew I didn't have the strength to stand up to him. And he was 145 kgs. He was very strong. I was afraid of him. And just his face and his whole appearance when he came near me, I would just be so intimidated. And that look in my face is what made him realize that he had power and he had control. And that just spurred it on. And so he would find marks around the house and say, look at this is disgusting. What type of a wife are you? You can't even keep a house clean. And so I'd say, well, but that was Scud, that was our dog's name. And he'd say, I don't care. This is why you need to be home at weekends. And this is why you need to be home in the evenings, so that you can, clean up. And if friends would phone me, he would say, this is my time. You can't have your friends phoning you at night. It's my time. And so I'd have to be home at 5:30. I'd still have to do the grocery shopping. And if I was later than 5:30, sometimes I'd have the key in the door, and I could hear the phone ringing at home, and I'd be panicking because now I've got a grocery packet on the one hand, my handbag in the other, and I had a managerial job. And so I'd be literally, when I got to the phone, it was dead, and I'd phone and I'd ask his work colleagues, please, can I speak to him? And they'd say sure, and they would have obviously told him, okay, it's Christel, and he'd just say, no, tell her I've gone. And then he wouldn't come back for the remainder of the evening till about 9:30, 10. And I wouldn't know where he'd been. He wouldn't tell me where he'd been. So it was always a case of controlling me through those games of, if you aren't where I want you to be at this time, then you're going to suffer the consequences, and then it's my fault.
Yeah.
So I would then think, yes, it is my fault, because I should have maybe made sure that I left the grocery store a bit earlier. For church, I would always arrive on time, sometimes a little bit later, and I would leave before the service had ended, because he would always say, okay, church should finish at 10:30, so you better be home by 10:30. Sometimes if I was a few minutes late, or I couldn't get out earlier, and I'd be driving and there'd be traffic, I'd be panicking because I couldn't get there, and sometimes he'd be reversing down the driveway and he wouldn't speak to me, would go away for the rest of the day, and that would be my Sunday, and I'd be left thinking, I should have just, maybe I should, next time I'll just leave church a bit earlier. I just mustn't dilly-daddle. I must make sure that my car is closer to the church. All of these things always making it my fault.
Wow.
Yeah, that's quite rough, and it's almost like textbook emotional manipulation. So I just wanted to know, at what point did you realize, because obviously you knew something was wrong, but at what point did you realize that this was actually emotional abuse? Because like physical abuse is easier to pick up on, because like, oh, they're hitting me, this is obviously wrong. But yeah, I've heard from many people that they don't really recognize that this is actually abuse, like for a very long time. So what was your story there?
Absolutely. It was after I'd actually separated from him that I realized, because I'd gone to an abuse recovery course at FAMSA once I'd separated. And that's when I realized that there is such a thing as emotional abuse. Because at that stage, he was the physical violence was I could justify those times, because it was like he was so angry at the fact that I'd perhaps cooked the peas wrong, or the carrots had too much salt, that I knew was my fault. I knew that I'd done that, but that he, and because of his strength, he just pulled me up, and he said that it was his strength. He didn't realize how strong he was. All he wanted to do was just hold me, my face. So he made excuses for that. And so then when he flung me across the entrance hall door, on the floor, and I actually ended up in the sliding doors leading onto our front, our entrance hall. There were towels, and so that he tore my T-shirt. And I then thought, okay, fine, now I can go to the police. Calmly, I took my keys, and that's when he tried to stop me. And this was within, I'd say, the last 2 to 3 years of before I separated. And that was when I thought to myself, it was after something that my brother had said to me. He said to me, Chrissy, I know that divorce isn't on the cards for you, but I don't like what I see in your eyes, and I don't like, as your brother, I don't like the way that you're being treated. And he'd come to stay with us for 3 months while he'd broken off with his girlfriend. And during those 3 months, he lived on eggshells, because he never knew what mood he was going to come home in. And so that made me think, okay, somebody else is noticing that something's wrong here. I knew something was wrong, and something was not how it's supposed to be in a relationship. And he said to me, if I, as your brother, don't like the way you're being treated, how much more doesn't God?
Wow.
And so that really struck me, because I thought, what do I think about God then, if I am believing that this treatment is what I'm worth? And if God's expecting me to be in this marriage, if even my own brother is saying to me he doesn't like the way that I'm being treated. And my family didn't know anything about what was happening. That was the first glimpse from my brother that he knew, because I stayed away from family functions.
I was going to ask, how did you hide it for so many years?
Yeah.
What was happening? Was he a different person outside the home, or?
Outside the home, he was a charmer, full of jokes. People would laugh. He'd always be very entertaining. And so he was a real live wire outside. And so that's why his times that he went out, he chose very carefully. So when he wasn't feeling on top of the world, about himself, he wouldn't want to go anywhere. So I never knew with my friends when I could say, yes, we could go to the braai, or when we could go anywhere, because last minute I'd sometimes have to just cancel and say, he's not feeling well.
Sure.
Because the mood at home was just, he would say, why do we even have to go to your friends? I don't even like them. Or why do we have to go to your family? And he'd start running my family members down. So I always was making excuses for him for family functions, because and if I told my family told them the truth, or anything that he would say to me or do to me, then I knew that my family wouldn't look at him in the eye without sort of having some form of, like, you better treat my daughter well, or you better treat my sister well, or having something off, and he would sense it. But even with that, his own guilt made him feel like, they're looking at him funny. And so I would still get the abuse when I got home, and that was verbal. And usually it was the intimidation of, like, he'd get on top of me and he'd just say to me, you're just a useless piece of nothing. You're just absolutely nothing. You can't do anything right. Look at you. Even your own family don't even know anything about what's happening here. So I knew that if they did know, it would just all be... So the the emotional abuse, I only found out once I'd left him.
Sure.
And I went to the FAMSA abuse recovery, that what I was experiencing was actually emotional abuse, the sexual abuse, and obviously the verbal abuse.
Yeah.
So I didn't realize that there were all of those type of abuses and the financial abuse. So in my case, it was where I had to pay for everything, for the rates, the insurances, for the cars, for everything that we had, and also the food. And he paid for the bond. That was it. And he told me that the bond was very high, and that's all that he could afford. But he was earning like double my salary and some. So I couldn't afford to buy myself any nice clothing. I couldn't afford to buy myself anything, because he ate very well, because he was 145 kgs. So I'd often say, well, I'm not hungry, because I knew that I could only afford to buy, say, the packs of fish that you get, the crumbed fish, where you only get 6 or 8 pieces. So I knew that if we had to have this twice a week, that there'd only be enough for him to eat, and not for me, because he'd ask for an extra piece, or he'd say he's hungry. And so I would just say I'm not hungry, and I wouldn't eat, because I knew how much was in the fridge. And so that was in my case the financial abuse, where he was basically able to buy anything he wanted, but I couldn't buy myself anything. And I went into overdraft quite regularly, because he'd leave the water on the hose pipe on all night. So the water bill was so high, because it was running into the pool, and the pool was overflowing. But that was for my account, not for his account. And anything that went wrong in the house or needed fixing in the house was my responsibility to pay for. So if the washing machine broke, if the tumble dryer broke, if anything broke in the house, I had to fix it. And if anything broke outside the house, he would have to fix it. So, and I paid for the water and lights as well. So obviously that was all my responsibility. But for some people, the financial abuse comes in where they aren't allowed to work, or he'd prefer them not to work, so that they don't have money to leave him. So it's that financial control, and all the wife's money, if she has any, goes to the children.
I just want to know, like 13 years, like how did you cope? Because it sounds like you were living in hell, really. It's like, how did you deal?
That's a good question. It was my belief system, firmly grounded in the fact that as a Christian, you don't get divorced. And as a wife, you need to love above all things. You need to submit to your husband. So if you are in any way, if you stand up and even have an opinion, or stand up and say, no, I don't agree with that, or in my case, where I couldn't even say, what you're saying is actually, I don't like the way you're speaking to me, that would, in my mind, amount to you being insubordinate, you're not being submissive. So I did go to 3 different churches, church elders, in those days, and at that stage, abuse was not really a thing that was spoken about, and was very much pushed under the carpet. And so at all 3 churches, they told me I need to love him more, because of what it says in Paul's letters. And that a husband is drawn to the Lord through a wife's love for him, and basically her behavior towards him. So that once again added to my feeling of unworthiness, and that there must be something wrong with me, because I'm obviously not loving him enough. And yet I was the best to my ability, I was loving him by just being nice, being kind. I was going above and beyond sexually, because now I was his wife. Now everything was legal. So even the pornography that he was watching, and hiding from me, that I would find it, and then he'd say, no, it was on the videos. There was videos in those days. He would say, no, it's for the guys at work. He just has to copy it for them. He didn't know what was in the machine. And then he eventually said, well, we need to make our own porno movies. So what he saw on the pornographic movies is what he wanted me to replicate. So that was such sexual abuse, because I did it because I thought that was my duty, as a wife. And once again, it could be followed up by scripture that was misinterpreted, where, you're not to deny your husband. So those scriptures were always brought up in those days. And so it was just, I found no help from those sources, and it just encouraged me to believe that there was something wrong with me. So when my brother said those words to me, it shifted my mindset about God and what I really believed about God. And so that, and my brother and I are very, we're very much on the same page. We think very much we're very relational and care about other people's feelings. And so when he said that, I thought to myself, sure, Christel, maybe you need to reevaluate your idea of God and what you've believed about God, and now look at God as how he really is in scripture. And that's what started my recovery process, if I can say that, to eventually, so after my brother had said that, it was about another 3 years that I survived or was continuing to just put up with that treatment. And that's when the physical abuse became evident, because then he realized that he could no longer intimidate me. I just looked at him with eyes that were like stone cold, because I'd switched myself off emotionally to him, because I wanted to now learn more about how did God feel about love. What does God believe about love? What does God really believe about marriage, about wives, about husbands? So I started reading scripture more in context and not just as it is written, because then you can take many scriptures out of context, and that's where many things have gone wrong.
So how did you eventually get out? Because I think for so many people, you feel stuck, and it's just, I'm going to be stuck for the rest of my life. How do you move out and get out, and how do you reach a point, especially as this very religious person, where divorce is just, we don't say that word, you don't think about it. How do you gain the courage, and what was that process like for you?
Good question too. So the process happened, in the mind shift change happened within those 3 years, where I suddenly realized my idea of God is what I can work on, because nothing else is within my control. I can't change him. And I started then reading scriptures, re-evaluating my beliefs about myself, and recognized where those beliefs came from, and recognized that the enemy, Satan, basically he's the only enemy, and that he was trying to prevent me from actually getting to know God's love and learn about God's love, so that I could share God's love and be a vessel of God's love. That it was being reaffirmed, my low self-worth, and how God sees me was being reaffirmed. The lies that I'd believed about how God sees me, that he sees me as less than, because of the scriptures that I'd read way back when, or the teachings I'd received, which was that there was an equality, and a man is up here and a woman is down here. And that's why Paul wrote this and wrote that. So I had to then, and wanted to, learn about how God sees me, and that value that I saw of how God actually does value women. That's what started the change process. And with that, I then started realizing, okay, I can, God and I can do this together. And so it was believing that God is now with me, as opposed to God is expecting me to get on the same page as my husband, that I've got to submit to him. I've got to be a doormat. I've got to just do anything he says, because then he will get closer to God, and then everything will be rosy. And so I saw a psychologist. And when she heard my story, she then said to me, she said, no, you need to, there's so much depth to what's brought you here, but what you need to do first of all is you need to just try and get away for a weekend. Is that possible?
Sure.
So I said to my ex-husband, I said, look, I just need a break. I'm just so stressed that I'm clearly not being a good wife to you, so I made it all my fault, which I was used to doing, so it was no pretense. And I just said, I need to get away. He didn't even ask where I was going to go to. He didn't even ask how I was going to get there, or did I have the money, nothing like that, because he'd already, as soon as he heard that, he just started, he said, yes, no, that's true, because he knew now he could go on a big boys rampage out and go and, he was already being unfaithful, but I couldn't prove it. So he had already made plans. And so where I went was a friend of mine. She had a cottage at the back of her property, and up here in Hilton, actually. And so I went and stayed there. But the psychologist had said to me, what you do while you're away on this weekend is you write down on paper, make 2 columns, and on the one side write down what makes me happy in the relationship, and on the other side write down what makes me unhappy. Well, I ended up writing 4 columns of the right side of things that made me unhappy, and only 4 points on the left side. And they were just things like, well, he's my husband, and I was always wanted to be married. The other thing was that he makes me laugh. And, it was like the other 2 things I can't even remember, but I really had to dig deep for those. And the rest I just wrote and I wrote and I wrote and I wrote. And so I'd made an appointment to see her again on the Monday. And before I told my ex-husband I'd be home. And so she briefed me and she said, okay, this is what you do. You phone him and you tell him that you'll meet him at the house, not your house, at the house. And then I think you need to separate from him. And because this is, if your heart was a body part, I would say you needed ICU. So you need to take care of yourself. So that started the process, and it wasn't easy from there, but it started that process of me seeing the therapist then every week, and her walking me through the steps. But the big thing was that I was willing and basically needed to say it was me, that I'm doing this. I really need to just get out of the situation because I feel so tired, I feel so stressed, and I just need to see what it is about my life that's making me like this, because you don't need to have me as your wife being like this either. So playing into the fact that woe is him if he has to live with a wife like me. And that helped me through, because I knew from my therapist that she had told me there's nothing wrong with everything that you're experiencing right now is not good, and that's wrong. There's nothing wrong with you, and the fact that you're feeling like this is wrong. There's nothing wrong with you. So we're going to help fix you. And so I had her as backup that was lifting me up on the one side, and so that enabled me to take the blame or make out as if it was all
like
me.
You had to
play into his game,
which is quite a scary thing to have to do. But
because if it was any other way, as soon as I showed up a bit strong, then he would try and control me again and manipulate me, and I was too vulnerable, and he still scared me every time he came near me. So I needed to act weak in his presence so that I could keep this going until I became strong enough emotionally to deal with separating from him, because I was still too vulnerable. And one gets caught in that cycle that if you leave too early, which I tried to do numerous times by just going and saying I need to visit my sister, and then I could never bring myself to leave him because I was caught in that cycle. So I needed to change my value of myself, how I saw myself, so that I could strengthen myself emotionally to stand up to those emotions that said, you'll never live without him. He's right. Look at you. You can't do anything. You can't even stand on your own 2 feet. And just this tape recorder, stuck record in my mind. So
that's interesting that you say that, because I think a lot of people, they leave and then they come back, and they leave and they come back. But like you said, I think there is that process of needing to work up that strength and figure out, and realize something is wrong, and then when you walk away, have that strength to walk away, so that when those thoughts come up where I need him, it's no, you've walked a journey and you don't.
Absolutely.
Because a lot of people blame people for staying in abusive relationships. It's how could you? But when you've been beaten down, how do you stand up?
And they make you believe that no one else could possibly love you, that they're the only ones who can do that. So they really get into your mind like that.
Absolutely. And you've lost your support system because they've isolated you.
Okay, so being a religious Christian person, once you decided to get a divorce, I just want to know how your church reacted to that at the time. Did you feel maybe excluded or turned away from the church at all, or what was your experience there?
That is a good question in today's times, especially because in those days they almost overlooked it, but they at the same time they treated me differently. So I changed churches. So where we were together, I changed to a different church, and that's actually when I came to HBC. So they didn't know me as a divorcee, or they didn't know my ex-husband. So I didn't have that thing of oh, shame, we're so sorry about what happened, or we heard you got divorced, and then there was the stigma. So I came here as my parents' daughter, and then it took a while before people actually even knew what really had happened. But the stigma that was attached to divorce, because of also my belief systems about divorce, that I never wanted to get divorced. I'd committed myself forever through sickness and health, and for better, for worse. But I myself still needed to forgive myself for divorcing, even though I had all the reasons to. It was my promise that I'd made. So I needed to understand again and afresh that God didn't hold anything against me for getting divorced, and that he was far more interested in my relationship with him and my destiny than he was about the divorce. So he hadn't disqualified me because I was divorced. He just made a new plan. And that's the amazing thing with God, is that I had made a wrong choice in my my husband, my ex-husband, and that was in my brokenness. I'd made the wrong choice because of my belief systems that were off kilter from the Word of God and God's actual design for a woman. I had made a wrong choice, but God did not hold that wrong choice against me. He just made another plan. And so when I got that, then I was able to face anybody within the religious circles that would judge me, or that would even look at me differently or disqualify me from doing certain things in the church, holding certain positions in the church because I was divorced, which sometimes happens in certain denominations. And because I knew that God held nothing against me, that gave me the confidence to be able to say, okay, that's all right. And to almost not be affected by the person's reaction. I sometimes could see it on the people's faces and how they would just say almost like, okay, see you later.
Sure.
But although I was disappointed, it didn't damage my self-worth.
Because you knew. Like,
Yeah.
I think a lot of people's opinions matter more than God's,
Yes.
which is,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
And then I think one thing I want to ask is, how would you advise people now, like in terms of the early warning signs, before it gets to the point where you got to? Like, what can you look for even before getting married?
Excellent, yeah.
Yeah.
So any form of control where your gut feels like, oh, he's trying to control me. There's a difference between giving like loving advice for your protection or for your care, as a friend would. But if he or she is trying to control you, dominate you, because I say the she because there's a lot of women now that are abusing their partners as men who are just loving, kind, generous, compassionate men. So it's not, abuse doesn't just happen in one sex.
Yeah.
Yes.
So if that person that you are with and that claims to love you, if they are trying to control you through the way, by telling you what you should or shouldn't wear, by telling you how you should or shouldn't spend your money, by telling you what you should or shouldn't eat, by telling you which friends you should or shouldn't see, where you should and shouldn't go. Those are key factors of things that are an expression of yourself or that are part of your own free choice. And so when someone that says that they love you is putting those haves to, shoulds, musts, don't you dare, those type of demands on you, that's a good sign that, okay, this person could be controlling. If you're not sure, you can always ask the question like, why would you say that? Or why do you think that? Why do you think that person is not good for me? So always ask the curious questions, why? And then you will get the heart attitude. And if it's one of protection, okay, then you can let it go. But if it happens again and again, then you then start don't push down the warning bells. Also, if the way that the person speaks to you, if it's at the tone of voice can say a lot. If it's speaking to you derogatorily or always criticizing you, criticizing your friends, criticizing your family, criticizing your loved ones, never not complimenting you or making fun of you. And there's a difference between joking about something that you feel okay about and you joke about it yourself. But there's a difference between that kind of joking and where they are almost trying to you be the laugh at, or there being a joke at your expense. Because someone that loves you doesn't do that. There's always a hidden motive behind that, either like, oh, look what I'm with, look what I have to cope with, or look what I'm dealing with, and look at her, she's actually just, she's stupid. Or so if anybody actually makes you feel stupid or feel less than or less valuable or less important than them or the people that you're with, that's also a very clear sign. So a very big thing too is to be aware of somebody telling you that what you have actually said, that where they make you feel like you've heard wrong, deceived,
gaslighting.
Yes, and not trusting your gut. So if you know that you know that you know that you heard X, Y, and Z, and they're telling you, no, that's not actually what I said, this is what I said, and you know that that's not what they said, trust your gut.
Yeah.
And make a note, even if it's a mental note, but even a written note, depends on how far it's gotten in the relationship where all of these flag signs are going up. It helps then to make a written note of these things, because when there's love involved, when you're really committed to the person, you don't want to see these signs. But when you write them down and they actually there, and you recognize, oh goodness, I wrote this down about 3 days ago. I wrote this down last week. This is becoming a bit more too familiar. Then it helps you to trust your gut and to build yourself up, as opposed to continually putting yourself down and telling yourself, or maybe you are losing it because did that really happen? Or, you start doubting yourself.
Yeah. I think, what's so important to remember, especially as Christians, I mean, it defines love so clearly in the Bible, like love is patient, love is kind, and so on and so on, and that God himself is love. And I mean, if the love or the so-called love that you're getting from your partner doesn't look like that, like it's not love, it's just them controlling you. But now I also just wanted to ask, because you're remarried. Yes. So how has that been for you? Because I don't know, like, have you ever experienced maybe some PTSD from your previous relationship, and how different is your relationship now to your past one?
I can assume that it's like very difficult to put yourself in that vulnerable position again.
Yes. And it was. So the mission work helped by going overseas and helping other people, helping the girls feel better about themselves and discover their value in God. That definitely helped for me to be less sort of vulnerable to meeting another man that I would have attracted another abusive man in the early days, because I hadn't yet fully worked on my self-worth. And they say in the FAMSA course that I did, they said that you can expect recovery for every 5 years. 5 years for every year that you were married or in the relationship for recovery.
Wow.
So I knew that with God, that statistic could be, obliterated. So I trusted that, but I kept thinking every year I was better off than before. So what I realized after I'd done this work in Thailand, I realized that I'd healed quite a lot, because I was constantly trying to encourage the girls about their self-worth and how God sees them, that was repeated into me regularly. So that was no longer a problem. My self-worth wasn't a problem, but trusting God.
Yes. The electricity's gone off, so if you're watching, just enjoy the darkness.
Yes. So trusting God's love and trusting love as a process, and trusting my gut for love was the tough part. So very long story short, when I got back from Thailand, my brother introduced me. He actually asked me, so the same brother who'd said to me about if you what you must, if I as your brother don't like the way that you've been treated, how much more doesn't God? That wonderful brother also said to me that if, are you interested in dating again? And I said, yes, of course. I said, I just haven't found the right man, but I'm open.
He was a good person to trust in
Yeah,
the situation.
Absolutely. And so he said, well, there's this guy that has just become a client, and he's really a godly man, and just seems like a really decent guy, and he's established, and I think you guys would get on well. So would you be interested in a cup of coffee? So I said, yeah, for sure. So he then had spoken to Paul in the meanwhile, and he said to Paul, how do you feel about dating again? And he said, well, I'm scared, And he'd been divorced for 3.5 years, and he hadn't dated anyone else again. He just worked on himself and tried to find out what faults did he have that could have caused his wife to leave. and she wanted to go and do caring overseas. So that's what she did. But he thought, why would she just suddenly want to leave? So he spent that time just looking at himself. And so he said, I don't know how to do this thing. So if she wants to have a cup of coffee with me, then she needs to contact me, just in case she's only saying yes because you're her brother. So he told me this. So I thought, okay, all right, I don't really like doing this, but anyway, I'll do it. And I WhatsApped him.
Breaking gender roles.
Yes.
Taking the first step.
Yes, yeah. God was pushing me my boundaries. Yes. I only saw that now. So I did the thing I'd never done before, which was like to try and, initiate. And next thing, he phoned. And I'm like, oh, he's phoning. And I thought, at least he's got the courage and the guts to actually, do that. So, and then we had a chat and we met for coffee, and the coffee lasted like 4 hours. And the waitress kept coming back and saying, would you like some more? Would you like some lunch? And we were like, no, I really need to be going. And he's like, no, me too. And we didn't. So that's what started our weekend dating, going on dates. And he was just such an amazing man. Then yet I doubted my gut once again, about a year into it. My health issues as well. I was like, how can I inflict these health issues on such a wonderful man? I don't know where I'm going to be, whether this is going to be something that's going to be permanent or whether God's going to heal me from. I don't know. And anyway, so I broke up with him, and he just accepted, well, okay. But inside him, he just had this belief that I was going to be his wife. And so a month later, he phoned and said, can we just get to know each other again, just as friends? I really enjoy your company. We laugh well. We just have fun. And I'd love to just carry on doing that just as friends, no pressure. Anyway, we did that. 6 months later, he proposed. And now we've been married 2 years. On the 16th of May, it was 2 years. So yeah, we got married during lockdown.
Lovely. I think something that you mentioned there is so important is, even when he contacted you, he said, I miss your company, and you were good friends. And I assume that was what was a big part that was missing in your first marriage.
Yeah. I had this idea that, it needed to be this like major attraction, like magnets, like in the movies, And I always had these expectations of romance being, you kiss and you go off and you all these things that a romance novel or romantic movie would show you. And yes, that can be and is a healthy part in younger relationships. But now, as I've grown older, our relationship that we have right now is truly so based on a good, solid friendship and being able to banter almost. Where I'm not afraid to voice my opinion, which I've never done before. Wow. And because he was a man, I could never speak my mind. And now he allows me to, and yet he loves me. He loves everything about me. He loves me. I mean, we had I'll share this very quickly, but we had, he loves his cooking, and I tried to make a dish for him, and I can make standard meals, and I used to do all the cooking, but in my previous marriage, and my cooking skills were quite good, I thought, but I'd lost confidence over the years. With all my mission work, I didn't need to cook, so my confidence levels were a bit low. But still, I made a dish that's quite nice, and it's liked by other people. But because he's such a wonderful cook, I was feeling a little bit insecure within myself, and I was like, oh, do you like the dish? Is it nice? He says, yeah, it's nice. And then the next, when I made it again, he added his sauce that he makes, and it's delicious. It's an amazing sauce. He's an Italian cook. And so he added the sauce. So when I said to him, like, how's the dinner? And he said, it's nice. It's the sauce that makes it.
Oh, no.
Well, that was it. I was like, And I then, it took me a few mouthfuls before I then said, can I just say something? I said, this minced dish, is it your sauce that made it? And he's like, yeah, I'm just saying that because I like it. It tastes like babooty. So I said, okay, so next time I'll make babooty then. I won't make my minced dish. And he was like, no, that's not what I'm saying. Oh, I didn't mean to say that. Next time I'll just shut up. So I said, no, I don't want you to shut up. I just want you to say what you say. So he said, well, that's what I did. And then I'm like, okay, all right. And I carried on. And then I'm like, oh God, what have I just done? It's my insecurity. It's me feeling low about myself today. And so I was able to then say to him, you know what, my love, I'm sorry. What's going on in my head today is this. And so I just needed you to say, yes, the dish is wonderful. And because I didn't get that, I immediately thought, your cooking is so good. Mine is not as good as yours. And so already I was just feeling insecure now about my cooking. And it just went, and he's like, no, but it's not. And I said, I know. But I'm just saying, I'm sorry. It was uncalled for what I did. And I'm sorry. And so we were able to then just kind of laugh about it and say, oh, I'm sorry you were feeling like that. And so that's genuine. I can be free to say what I'm saying. I can be free to be, well, yes. And, get a little bit feisty.
Yes.
And he's not intimidated by that. And so that was just such a relief. And from an emotionally abusive situation where that person would have just lambasted me and told me how awful, what do I think I can cook anyway for, or, none of your dishes are actually good anyway, and I just keep quiet. That could have been the opposite, which is what I was used to. And here this man just loves me, and I get to experience every day what it means to be loved by a man. And that's what God promised me would happen many years ago, that he would show me practically through a man what his love is like. And now that prophecy's come true.
Wow. Well, what a nice way to end the episode.
Yeah,
awesome.
Cool.
Thank you so much, Christel. This is awesome.
Pleasure.
And I really hope that some people really, if you are in that situation, begin to notice, oh, this sounds a little bit too familiar to me. Or we can just show compassion and actually believe people when they say they're in an abusive situation, not to the point where they have to wait till they're hit to say something. So
Absolutely.
thank you so much.
Cool, yeah.
Thank you for having me again.
Awesome.
That was awesome.
Well, we'll catch you in the next episode.
Exactly. We
Sorry,
didn't do
we
our
are in the
outro.
dark.
What is our outro?
Oh, yes, sorry. Guys, if you loved this episode, remember that sharing is caring. So share this with all your friends.
Amen. Okay.
Cool. Bye, guys.
Bye.